CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. 2 explosions at Kabul airport. A radical Islamic splinter group is blamed. It's feared as many as 13 people may have been killed.
Our other headlines: trouble in store. UK retailers call for government action to tackle worsening shortages in the shops blamed on Brexit and COVID.
Get the jab or pay the price. Delta Airlines announces plans to penalise unvaccinated staff.
And raise the bar on cybersecurity. President Biden calls for action from tech firms in the face of online attacks. Kabul airport has been targeted in 2 bomb attacks. It's feared as many as 13 people, including women and children, are among the dead. All this with just hours to go until Allied troops withdraw from Afghanistan.
NATO and Western intelligence services had warned of a very high-risk terror attack from a group affiliated to Islamic State. Meanwhile, thousands of Afghans are still gathering at the airport in a desperate bid to flee Taliban rule. Well, let's talk to our correspondent in Kabul, Zamiralai Abbasin. What more can you tell us about these attacks taking place at Kabul airport?
Hello. All the roads and ways leading to Kabul airport are blocked by the Taliban, and there are a lot of casualties, which is not finalized yet. But as I've been receiving the casualties report from different hospitals, emergency surgical hospitals, said there are dozens of injured and dead people arrived to this hospital, while other private hospital and governmental hospital also full of the injured and dead bodies. 6 of them, according to the doctors inside, did along the way when they were reaching the hospital, and the Taliban are not letting journalists and anyone else to the area, and journalists are complaining about their ill behavior, and they say that the Taliban are now on every road leading to Kabul airport, and the suicide attack, and then another one which first came along with B gate, and the other one close to a hotel resisting to Kabul airport, as a catastrophe happening again. But much more casualties, which is not finalized yet to be confirmed.
Multiple fatalities there. Zamiralai Abbasin, thank you very much for the update.
Well, the organisation suspected of plotting to attack Kabul airport is ISIS-K. It's a splinter group of the Islamic State that took control of much of Iraq and northern Syria in 2014 and 2015. But what more do we know about it? Colin Clark is an expert in terrorism and security at the Soufan Group.
Based on the last 48 hours of intelligence that has been released, this is likely what the U.S. and its allies were expecting. I would bet my money on an ISIS-K suicide attack, which is meant not only to attempt to kill U.S. soldiers, but to cause havoc and embarrass the Taliban in the process.
Many people watching this program will be more than familiar with ISIS. Few perhaps will know about ISIS-K. What more do we know about ISIS-K and the threat the group poses to Afghans?
Well, it's a significant threat. There's between 1,500 and 2,200 fighters, largely concentrated in the eastern provinces of Afghanistan. And this is an affiliate or franchise group spun out of core ISIS in Iraq and Syria, just as bloodthirsty, just as draconian, and just as willing to wantonly kill civilians and slaughter them.
What is its relationship with the Taliban?
ISIS-K and the Taliban are mortal enemies. These are groups that are at loggerheads. They're going to be in steady conflict for the foreseeable future. Nobody expects that ISIS-K is ever going to unseat the Taliban and take over the country, but they could very well play a spoiler role where they continue to do what we think they did today, which is launch sporadic attacks in Kabul and the surrounding regions.
Should the West be concerned, is the West concerned about ISIS-K, or is this an Afghan-only concern?
I think it's primarily an Afghan concern, but we'd be foolish to underestimate ISIS. We've done it several times in the past, and it's never worked out well. And so this is a group that, if they're able to rebuild their external operations planning capabilities, could very well look to plan spectacular attacks in the West, including in Europe.
How are the threats being identified by the intelligence services?
Well, we can't get into sources and methods here, but what we do know is that the threat is apparently high enough that the U.S., the Germans, and others are ringing the alarm bells and really going above and beyond to make it very clear that they believed a threat was imminent. It's now clear that the threat was imminent, and I expect this not to be the last, unfortunately. This could very well be the start of a campaign over the coming days and weeks by ISIS-K in Afghanistan.
What is pretty clear is that Western intelligence misread the Taliban's advance across Afghanistan. How come the intelligence seems to have been relatively well informed about this attack at Kabul airport? We've known about the possibility of something happening for some hours, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, and you're right. The intelligence was wrong on the speed with which the Taliban would take over the country. They had been cutting side deals with Afghan national security forces for weeks and months. And I think we should be concerned because, look, intelligence is imperfect. We're operating in a world of imperfect information. And so clearly they had specific information of a credible threat here. That's why they released that information. But you do have to wonder, for everything we're getting right, what are we missing and what's coming down the pike next?
There was a possibility that many countries would try to remain at Kabul airport for many more hours, flying more people out of Afghanistan. Does this attack, whatever it is, change that analysis? Will countries now decide it is simply too unsafe to be there?
It very well could. We're going to have to wait and see. But that's exactly the objective of whoever is behind this attack. Again, most likely ISIS-K, is to throw a monkey wrench into this whole process, to embarrass the Taliban, to attempt to kill U.S. soldiers, and really just make a giant spectacle of what's going on here. Remember, a significant part of terrorism is the psychological value, the propaganda value, and they've got that in droves here after this most recent attack.
How will news of this ISIS-K attack on Kabul airport be read in the U.S. government?
Again, it hasn't been confirmed that it was ISIS-K. It very likely was. I mean, the smart money is on that. It will be received in the U.S. government as just another, very deep blow to what's been a pretty messy and haphazard evacuation so far. And I think, it would be dishonest if I wasn't going to assess the Biden administration's morale to be quite low surrounding the series of events that have played out over the past couple of weeks.
French President Emmanuel Macron says the next few hours will be extremely risky, but France is aiming to evacuate several hundred more Afghans from Kabul airport. France plans to end flights from Afghanistan on Friday, ahead of the planned US departure from Kabul airport next week. Belgium's among the countries to have already completed its evacuations, while Germany was expecting to finish by the end of Thursday. Ross Cullen reports.
France has been moving people to Paris from Kabul via an airbase in the UAE. 12 flights have taken place so far, with the last possible departures now planned to happen by Friday evening at the latest. In a communique released on Thursday, the French Foreign Ministry said that since August the 15th, around 2,500 people have been evacuated from Kabul. These include more than 100 French nationals, 2,000 Afghans and citizens of partner countries. The statement said operations are still ongoing. These people are added to the hundreds of Afghans threatened because of their links to our country, who we have sheltered in recent years and in the spring of this year in anticipation of the current crisis. France actually began its airlifts in early May, flying out non-essential staff, and so it has had the capacity in recent days to be able to take people out who are neither French nor Afghan. A French ambassador to Afghanistan said that France had been able to evacuate more than 250 people from the European Union's delegation to Kabul. Now, looking elsewhere in Europe, other nations are finishing up their evacuations. Thursday marks the last day for Dutch flights taking people to the Netherlands from Afghanistan, and for German evacuation flights too, according to German media reports. Poland, Belgium, Denmark and Hungary have all already completed their evacuation missions. The airlifts have been taking place ahead of a full withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. President Joe Biden said he will stick to his August the 31st deadline for completing the US pullout, and the Taliban, which now controls almost all the country, has insisted that President Biden must not extend the US presence into September. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
The European Court of Human Rights says Poland must assist a group of Afghan migrants stranded on the Polish-Belarusian border. Both countries had refused to take responsibility for the refugees, with their situation seemingly part of a wider political dispute between the EU and Belarus. Aid charities have become increasingly concerned about their welfare, with some of the migrants reportedly seriously ill. Poland insists humanitarian aid has been offered but rejected by Minsk. Let's talk to our correspondent Penelope Lurch, who's following the story. Penny, what has the European Court of Human Rights decided, and what's been the reaction?
Well, these are just temporary measures, Jamie, that have come in from the European Court of Human Rights, basically trying to guarantee food, medical care, temporary shelter if possible, and access to legal help for this group of people on the border of Poland and Belarus, 32 Afghans who've been there for nearly 2 weeks. The same measures have also been asked of Latvia, where there is also a group of Iraqi nationals that have been there for quite some time. Now, Poland say that they will offer this aid. However, at this stage, they're waiting for Belarus to give the go-ahead. Earlier in the week, they said that Belarus had stopped aid reaching the group of migrants that are there who are trying to reach Polish territory to apply for international protection there. Now, these temporary measures last until the 15th of September. The parties involved also need to answer a number of questions within the next 10 days as this case proceeds. But as you said, aid organisations, human rights groups have been calling for quite some time for something to be done as they grow very concerned about the situation, particularly the health situation of these migrants. There's particularly concerns around a 52-year-old woman who one aid group from Poland say they believe may die without medical assistance. She's a mother of 3 who has been part of the group camped out there on the border for the last 2 weeks.
There's been a fair bit of tension, hasn't there, between Poland and Belarus over border crossings, with both countries not wanting to take responsibility. Why is this? What's the background?
Well, the EU and countries like Poland and Latvia that have found themselves in this situation, they accuse Belarus of driving migrants towards the European Union in retaliation for sanctions that are currently against Belarus over a disputed election last year and some of the fallout from that. Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, has previously said he will not hold back migrants trying to enter the European Union, and earlier this week blamed the breakdown in communication and cooperation on the borders on the EU. He's also understood that the Belarusian government has blamed Poland, saying that they are assisting in the flow of migrants from Afghanistan heading towards the European Union. So 2 sides of the story that basically are leading very much to a standstill, and these people becoming stuck in Latvia and in Poland at this stage with no real movement on either side of the story.
Penelope Lurch, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, raise your game on cybersecurity. President Biden's message to tech bosses in the United States.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's trade with the United States rose by 40% during the first 7 months of this year. A Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson said this shows the two economies complement each other and cooperation serves the interests of both sides. He went on to say Beijing and Washington have maintained normal communication on trade despite growing political tensions.
South Korea has become the first Asian economy to raise interest rates since the outbreak of COVID-19. The cost of borrowing is up 25 basis points from a record low of half of 1%. The Bank of Korea has warned of side effects from loose rates, with property prices and household debt rising in lockdown.
Qantas has posted a $1.3 billion pre-tax annual loss as the airline continues to be hit by the pandemic. But Australia's flag carrier is confident flights to countries with high vaccination rates, such as Britain and the United States, will resume in December, an announcement which saw its share price rise by 3.7%, the highest figure since April.
UK car production has fallen to its lowest July level in 65 years. Chip shortages and worker absences as a result of the so-called pandemic, which forced workers to self-isolate, are being blamed. The Society of Motor Manufacturers says 53,400 vehicles were made last month. That's down 37.6% on last year.
And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're 24 hours a day available on Freeview.
The UK economy is facing a supply chain crisis, which could damage the country's recovery from the pandemic. Major retailers are seeing levels of stock at their lowest in nearly 4 decades. Well, David Weisick is from the Federation of Wholesale Distributors, and I asked him what factors were behind the shortages.
It's actually a shortage of people from one end of the food supply chain to the other, from the farms to the restaurants and the shops. We haven't got enough people to take the fruit and vegetables out of the ground, and we haven't got enough people to cut them up and put them on plates at the other end. And at every stage in between, in processing, in distribution, and in service, we haven't got enough people. But it's the people who bring those sections together where we're missing most of all, and that's the HGV drivers.
I mean, what sort of challenges does that create for restaurants, for example? I mean, you've got an eye on every step of that chain.
Yes, and of course, any disruption in that supply chain causes ripples that run down to the end, and they're always worse at the end. And that's why we're seeing gaps on supermarket shelves, not all the time and not everywhere all at the same time. But you can't always get what you want all the time. So it's a choice shortage really, rather than a food shortage. But that shortage of choice is worse for the restaurant trade, because you've got a menu and you need to have those ingredients on that menu in order to be able to offer it.
So then you look at technology and you think, well, maybe that's the answer. I know the government are looking at these extra long lorries that are meant to be eco-friendly. There's talk about doing something with visas to speed them up. Is technology the answer? And if so, what?
Well, yes, it is, but it's not the answer to this problem. This problem is now. September is a critical month in food supply. The schools go back for the first time. They've been off all summer. The workplaces have been closed for months in some cases, and they're starting to ask their staff to come back in again. So that's workplace canteens opening up. That's the local coffee shop, the sandwich bar. They're all going to want food. And it's still summertime, hopefully. And those of us who don't have school-aged children, we want to go on our holidays. So the coastal resorts, the hotels, everybody else, they all need food. September is going to be really, really critical. And that's only the start of it. In October, we have Brexit, EU border controls coming in, or border checks coming in. And after that, you're into Christmas. Now, we missed Christmas last year. Everybody's desperate to go out, celebrate with their friends and colleagues. The restaurants and pubs and bars, they're all desperate to recover, because if you remember, they were closed for large parts of last year and the first half of this year, or trading very, very low. And so they want to get everybody in. They want to everybody to have the huge festival of food that is Christmas. But they're gone from having stock but no customers at the beginning of this year to having customers and no stock.
Well, as you say, this is an important stockpiling period ahead of the festive season. So will this Christmas be cancelled?
No, it won't be cancelled, but it might be a bit different. And I think it's all, as you say, it's all about the preparation. People are starting to buy in now, thinking about what might be different, thinking about what menus might look like, thinking about what your celebration at home might look like. But what we could do is try and fill the gap in the drivers between now and Christmas, and that would help immensely.
US President Joe Biden has asked private sector executives to raise the bar on cybersecurity, saying they have the power, the capacity and the responsibility to do so. The call came during a meeting at the White House. So let's talk to our correspondent, John Terry, who's in New York right now. John, this was a powerful gathering, wasn't it?
It really was. It was an absolute who's who in the big world of big tech and big finance. I mean, these are some of the names. Apple's Tim Cook took part in all this. The new man at Amazon, who's called Andy Jassy, took over from Jeff Bezos recently. He was on the event as well. Google's top man, Sundar Pichai, he was there. And key banking personnel as well, including the man they call America's banker, who is Jamie Dimon, who heads up the big bank in New York, which is JP Morgan Chase. And at the end of it all, Microsoft and Google and IBM and Apple are all pledging to spend billions of dollars on this issue, which President Biden said was one of the crucial issues of our time. And as you said in the intro, he called on all these companies and many, many much smaller ones all around the country and around the world to raise the bar when it comes to the issue of cybersecurity. Now, he made some public comments before the meeting truly got underway, and here's something of what he had to say.
And because of cybersecurity is a global issue, we've also rallied G7 countries to hold nations who harbor ransomware criminals accountable. And I might add, I had a summit with Vladimir Putin and made it clear to him that we expected him to hold them accountable as well, because they know where they are and who they are.
And at the end of it all, the president said that they intend to work with big tech and with financial institutions in New York and elsewhere to set out a new list of guidelines in order to try and sort this situation a little bit. And as far as Joe Biden is concerned, he sees millions and millions of jobs in cybersecurity. And I think I read a report the other day saying that there are thousands of jobs open in the United States in cybersecurity. And one of the ones that really intrigued me, I don't know whether you know this, but there is a job in the industry whereby you get taken on quite legitimately by a company and you pay tax quite legitimately. It's a legitimate job. But your job is to hack into other companies' systems in order to see how tight their security is. So that's just one example of a new job that might be coming along in order to try and cure this problem.
Perhaps a new career for you, John. Meanwhile, what's the latest on earnings?
Yeah, I still use an abacus, I'm afraid. I'm not tech savvy at all, really. Earnings, well, Salesforce. Now, talking of tech savvy, here's a tech savvy company for you. Now, when they rejigged the Dow Jones recently, they kicked off famous names like Exxon and Pfizer and Raytheon, and they brought on a company called Salesforce. And we're all going, huh, what's Salesforce? And it's very difficult to explain what Salesforce does, but basically they're a sort of online company, and they help your company to be a better company. That's essentially what they do. Last night they had very strong fiscal second quarter earnings for them, and their earnings and their guidance all beating Wall Street expectations. And that's partly because so many people are planning to and are setting up for, in the future, working from home or some kind of hybrid working where sometimes they go to the office and sometimes they work from home. We had a couple of retail different stores yesterday. Dick's Sporting Goods is a nationwide chain of stores that will sell you anything to do with the sporting world, including guns, actually, and ammunition, although they've rode back from that recently in most of their stores lately. They beat Wall Street expectations. They raised their guidance for the future. They brought in a special dividend that no one saw coming, and their shares were up a whopping sort of 17 or 18% yesterday, and they're up another 2% today. Other end of the scale, Nordstrom, relatively struggling department store. There are so many department stores in America. They're all selling more or less the same things. Nordstrom beat Wall Street expectations, but Wall Street didn't believe that they can go on doing it. So they were punished to the tune of 17%, and they're down 6% now. And then the Chinese ADRs, the American Depository Receipts here. This is the way Chinese companies operate in America, mostly at the NASDAQ. JD.com, Jingdong.com, turning in great earnings, beating Wall Street expectations. Shares up 1% this morning. And Didi is up 2%, and Baidu is up 0.1%. And this is because there's some bargain hunting going on. American investors have decided that actually these companies are probably not going to go away ever, despite the crackdown that's been going on. And anyway, there's a bit of a pause in the crackdown now. So they're looking at some very reasonable prices after they all fell substantially in the recent couple of months. And they've been buying and getting a bargain. So the ADRs have been up, many of them, although not Alibaba, I have to tell you, not Alibaba.
But bargains to be had. John Terrett, great to see you. Thanks very much. John Terrett on Wall Street.
America's third largest airline, Delta, is to impose a $200 monthly charge on employees who are not vaccinated against COVID. It's the latest attempt by a big firm to persuade staff to get jabbed. A number of U.S. companies, including United Airlines, Goldman Sachs and Microsoft, have all mandated shots for employees. Well, let's talk to the employment lawyer, Adam Cervallo. Adam, welcome to the program. $200 monthly surcharge on unvaccinated staff. You lawyers are going to be laughing all the way to the bank. This can't be lawful, surely.
It does to a certain extent. I mean, we're in an unprecedented time. Lawyers work from legal precedent, but with respect to employers in North America, United States and Canada, as part of any employment contract is an underlying duty to protect all workers in the workplace, and that includes unvaccinated workers.
I appreciate different countries have different laws. A growing number of employers have announced their own vaccine mandates. Can employers legally ask their employees whether they've received the COVID vaccine and ask for proof of vaccination?
Yes, they can, and it has to be limited with respect to the medical information that's requested. But it goes back to what I first said about the underlying obligation of every employer to provide a workplace that's healthy and safe, and that includes that unvaccinated worker. So in requesting documentation or proof of evidence of a vaccination, it complies with their duties, and in certain jurisdictions, that can go up to personal liability, but it goes to an extent, obviously.
The aviators' labour union, the Airline Pilots Association, has repeatedly said vaccination should be voluntary for its members. So what about the rights of the passenger? What are the legal rights here?
Well, that obviously gets a little confusing given you get into international airs, but fundamentally, if you're in a confined area where you're dealing with face-to-face contact with an individual who might be able to transmit that vaccine, and the CDC has gotten a little complex with who can transmit the latest Delta variant, but certainly an individual who's traveling would expect the same safety precautions, that they wouldn't be exposed to any additional risk of harm. And that falls upon employers like Delta to ensure that a workplace is not only safe for their workers, but for their patrons. And this overriding obligation or concern of, hey, my goodwill or my reputation may be irreparably harmed by individuals who use my services and then claim that an employee transmitted that COVID-19.
Well, your word is confusing. Here's another word for you, chaos. I mean, it's a potential legal shambles, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what we're going to see is, deducting from employees from their wages towards the coverage, the health coverage, additional health coverage, public systems, private systems. Really, the courts have been backlogged since the commencement of the pandemic, and really trying to work this out, do it with a cooperation. In this case, there's a union involved, which would hopefully give rise to a resolution. But really, what we're going to see is workplaces have to figure out how to manage, and that maybe calls upon the government, but really manage government mandates, health and safety of workers, and then the reputational risks that come from transmitting to clients, customers, in this case, passengers on an airplane.
Adam, I'm sure we'll return to the subject in coming months, but for the moment, good to talk to you. Thank you very much, Adam Cervallo.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we'll bring you the latest on that terror attack at Kabul airport, where it's feared 13 people have been killed and dozens more injured.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive the COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top story, the Taliban say 13 people have been killed, including women and children, and more than 50 people injured by two separate explosions outside Kabul airport. Other estimates put the death toll as high as 50. The Pentagon has said the possibility of a suicide bomber may be behind at least one of those attacks. No group has yet claimed responsibility.
The airport attacks may be a sign of the security challenge the Taliban may now face, having taken control of the country just weeks ago. speaking a short time ago. But before the deadly airport blast, a Taliban spokesperson said the group wants a peaceful and inclusive transition.
We don't want war. We don't want to have any conflicts unless we have to. I would like to tell all the people, including those in Panjshir and those who worked for the previous government, that they won't be targeted. Their safety will be guaranteed. They're entitled to enjoy a comfortable life with dignity. We will also give them land and solve their problems.
So while the Taliban talk peace, it seems likely that ISIS-K have very different plans. It makes for a highly complex situation on the ground. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson has been watching developments. Andrew, what can we make of this so far?
Well, Jamie, it was a highly broadcast attack. Intelligence services were warning of this coming some way off, and the warnings intensified even this morning. An announcement by the Armed Forces Minister in the UK saying that they wanted people to stay away from the airport because they had really credible intelligence of this going off. The airport is to the northeast, but still within the city boundaries, and the southern side of the airport is where Afghans approach. And on the southern perimeter of the airport, 2 targets were hit by these explosions. One, a gate called the Abbey Gate, which is where you would have seen a lot of Afghans packed around trying to get in, and also a hotel called the Baron Hotel, which has been used particularly by British soldiers for processing applicants for visas to get out of Afghanistan. So a very busy area. So we can take a lot of credibility from these reports that there might be many more people injured than we first thought. This number of 13 seems to be related to the numbers being brought to the hospital so far. But indeed, there may well be more casualties. It might even be that a couple of US servicemen have been injured, but that's not clear. It's hard to say how this happened. The Taliban reported about 5 days ago individuals that they said were from ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan, this breakaway extremist group, filming the area, perhaps scouting out for potential targets. So there's clearly a build-up of tension and clearly an element of the Taliban's enemies coming in from those hills to the east of the city, Pakistan side, the hills above Afghanistan there, making their presence felt now in the most violent way. It's a classic attack. It's almost certainly, we only have one source so far, but almost certainly at least one of the explosions a suicide bomb. There are also reports of some gunfire as well. And this interrupts, as you'll see from my report now, an extraordinarily crucial and for the time being quite smooth-running operation by the different NATO allies trying to get their people and eligible Afghans out of the country. Early reports are still confused, but the casualties arriving at Kabul's hospitals leave no doubt that this was a big explosion, thought to be a suicide bomber detonating at a gate near the airport perimeter. It's the disruptive attack that the NATO allies were dreading and could change the last few days of this operation drastically. On the tarmac in Kabul, the orderly process of boarding a fleet of international evacuation flights is a stark contrast to the chaos building outside. The international forces know that however effective their operations, they are under constant pressure from political deadlines and the increasingly credible danger of terror attack, not from the Taliban, but their sworn enemies in ISIL.
We believe that there is a very imminent, highly lethal attack possible within Kabul, and as a consequence we've had to change the travel advice to advise people not to come to the airport, indeed to move away from the airport, find a place of safety and await further instructions.
The explosion at the airport that followed was reported just a few hours after the government warning. The Prime Minister was visiting a British military communications centre on Thursday. He said the UK operation was proceeding well and hinted that even after next week, there might be other options.
In the time we have left, which may be, as I'm sure everybody can appreciate, quite short, we'll do everything we can to get everybody else. But I want to stress that this is just the first phase.
International efforts are producing results, and there is now a slow but steady stream of aircraft lifting off over the roofs of the city. And a growing trickle of Afghans, those who made it to the airport, got through the checkpoints and produced the right paperwork when it mattered, are gradually appearing around the world. In Australia, in the UK, in South Korea, in Spain.
And further afield, families are being led through the terminals at Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. But closer to home, European governments are becoming cautious about the terror threat. This is the last flight to land in Belgium for now. And in France, the deadline for Operation Complete has been brought forward to Friday. In Istanbul, President Erdogan has publicly warned of the dangers of what he calls an authority vacuum in Kabul, while his spokespeople are hinting that Turkey may take over control of the airport when the NATO allies are gone. None of this alleviates the plight of Afghans in the capital, still trying to get their money from the banks, forming makeshift camps while they consider what options, if any, they have left. For now, the Taliban are staying back, watching, but for the most part, keeping their distance. But at the land border to Pakistan, the numbers of people desperate to get out are still growing. And despite the warnings of danger at the airport, many in the crowds outside the terminals are holding their ground too. There are difficult days ahead. So condemnations all round for the explosion. That's clear. The world is collectively furious that the fighting has broken out. But what it means for this operation at the airport is not yet clear. Both explosions seem to have targeted the airport and not the city itself, designed deliberately to disrupt the Allied operation. It's going to be a difficult weekend now as governments start to decide whether or not they can keep risking their flights coming into this airport now that there are attacks taking place on the very perimeter of that airport. We shall see. Back to you.
Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
Well, how will the situation in Afghanistan affect China? And what role could China play in Afghanistan's future security? CGTN's Qian Wei talked to Afghanistan's former ambassador to the UK, Ahmed Wali Massoud.
We hope that China can play a very important role in that in Afghanistan, because China is our major neighbor and we have got border. And the threat, if it comes from Afghanistan, then that will affect everybody, including China as well. So before the threat spreads from there, we better to really curb it. Therefore, to push for an inclusive government which could represent all ethnicities in Afghanistan, especially those ethnicities who are bordering China, that is our ethnicities. So if China really kind of pushes for that sort of inclusive government, then of course in the future that can be safe and sound. So that's very, very important.
One of the things the Taliban promised, repeated again, in their press conferences and interviews of the spokesperson is not having Afghanistan be the place that would harbor forces eventually would harm neighboring countries. That, of course, is also promised to China. Now, Ambassador Massoud, how much do you think that will be implemented?
Well, I doubt it. As far as I know, the Taliban is mixed of different forces. It's not Afghani only, it's different forces from across the world as well. You know that some terrorist groups have had connection for a long, long time with the Taliban. And without those groups in Afghanistan, the Taliban would not have come so fast to capture the whole country. So now we all have to try to see how exactly we can do first fix inside Afghanistan. This is very important. Not that they just got promised that they will do something or they will not allow something. Probably they may not have even the force and the will and the resources not to allow them. So it's difficult to really kind of just believe that, well, they will not allow such things to happen. No, we better to really make sure that from the beginning there is an inclusive government which could represent only Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan, not any foreign groups.
The heads of 5 major international economic and financial organisations have been holding talks with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Our correspondent Ryan Thompson is in Frankfurt. Ryan, tell us more. Who took part in the meeting and what was it all about?
Hi there, Juliet. Yeah, this is a meeting of some of the best minds in finance, notably the ILO, the OECD, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. They are meeting with the leader of Europe's largest economy to try and just set the pace. We don't have too many details exactly about why this meeting is going ahead and what they are discussing. We're actually keeping our eyes on a press conference which should kick off in just a few minutes. That will sort of give us a sense of what they talked about and what it means going forward. But we do know that at least going into this, Germany, of course, Europe's largest economy, has had some shaky confidence in what happens next. Angela Merkel is stepping down after nearly 2 decades at the helm of this government. And business leaders have had shaky confidence about what lies ahead. We've seen that in a number of surveys, including by the IMF and the ILO here in Germany. So it's likely that they're trying to outline what some of this means for the global economy, but also for Europe's economy going forward and how to keep things on track.
Ryan, you talk about this shaky confidence, but Germany's been given a financial boost, getting a grant from the EU Recovery Fund. That might have helped confidence.
Yeah, well, Germany's been spending a lot of money lately over the past year. For the first time ever in history, they've actually canceled the debt brake, which is built into the constitution here, and that is to support some of these coronavirus stimulus programs and to keep businesses and consumers and everybody afloat during these trying times. Now they are finally getting a piece of that EU recovery fund, that $800 billion fund that's really unprecedented. It's the first piece of the cake that they are actually taking out, because there will be a number of debits and withdrawals by the German government. This one is for 2.2 billion euros, or about $2.7 billion, and they will continue to withdraw over the next few months and year. This just represents about 9% of the total spending, but it will help pay off a lot of the programs that they have spent so far, and also what they will do into the future. They are not alone in doing this. We've seen in recent weeks close to a dozen EU countries begin to take advantage of this special fund.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thanks for that update. Well, US Vice President Kamala Harris has left Vietnam after a week-long trip to Southeast Asia aimed at strengthening US ties. The trip began in Singapore, where she met the state's president and prime minister and agreed a number of new deals aimed at tackling climate change, the pandemic and combating cyber attacks. Harris then became the first US vice president to visit Vietnam and says she raised human rights abuses and freedom of expression.
China's ambassador to Canada has called for the release of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. Thursday marks 1,000 days since she was detained by Canada over bank fraud allegations. In a phone call, the ambassador told Meng to keep faith and take care, saying Canada should face up to its mistakes.
French President Emmanuel Macron has met Irish President Michael Higgins and Prime Minister Michael Martin in Dublin. Their talks focused on post-Brexit trading relations for Northern Ireland, as well as the crisis in Afghanistan.
Wildfires are continuing to spread across Russia. Authorities say 15 separate blazes are underway in the Urals region. An unexpected heat wave has left what's been called an extreme hazard in its wake. A ring of fire has been described in woodland around Mordovia, southeast of Moscow, with 1,200 emergency services personnel forced to escape the flames.
Armenia's parliament has been the scene of brawling over the last 2 days. The chaos erupted after a ruling party lawmaker called some of the country's past defence ministers traitors. Domestic political tensions have run high in Armenia following last year's defeat in the war with Azerbaijan for control of Nagorno-Karabakh. And for more on that story, go to our website, europe.cgtn.com.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China seeks to reassure the markets over its recent regulatory measures as Wall Street weighs up the impact on the big tech companies.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
There's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special one-hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China says its recent moves to regulate internet platforms are not targeting private and foreign enterprises. The Central Committee for Financial and Economic Affairs says the move aims to curb monopoly and unfair competition and create a level playing field for small companies. The spokesman said China is committed to opening up its economy.
Well, those recent steps to get tough on anti-competitive practices in China's tech sector are having an impact both at home and abroad. The new regulations have sent share prices for a number of Chinese companies listed in the United States tumbling. William Denslow reports now from New York.
China has led the world in online retail for 8 straight years. E-commerce sales were up nearly 11% in 2020. But China has taken steps to increase regulations and keep some of the biggest tech players in check.
They want transparency in terms of their operations, in terms of the data that they gather, and they want to make sure that the playing field is much more even and these companies don't take advantage.
This action has created a ripple effect on Wall Street. Over the past month, e-commerce giant Alibaba shares have slipped more than 9% here on the New York Stock Exchange. And search engine company Baidu is down around 5%. Analysts say investors here in New York are taking stock of the impact these regulations will have.
The impact is there. The uncertainty is what's pulling these stocks down. So at this point, it's not a great time to get in. We don't know where the dust is going to settle. At one time, it will settle. But at this point, I think it's prudent to stay on the sidelines.
Some US lawmakers are pushing to break up the biggest Silicon Valley tech companies. Google and Facebook are among those fighting antitrust suits. But some analysts say the scale of the shake-up in China is far more serious than what is transpiring in the US.
In some way, they're doing it because of antitrust concerns, but this is like a full-court press, so to speak.
US-traded Chinese stocks rebounded Tuesday after the US Securities and Exchange Commission announced plans to require these companies to disclose regulatory risk to traders. Some of the big Chinese tech firms could see more pain in their bottom line as Beijing seeks to ensure greater market competition. In the meantime, demand for online services is expected to keep soaring. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
The pandemic and the rise of hate crime has led to concerns that little research is being carried out on the health implications of coronavirus for Asian Americans.
Scientists say not enough money is being spent on studies on the Asian American and Pacific Islander community and that important data could be missed. Sarah Walton reports.
It's been a turbulent year and a half for many in the US, but particularly for Asian Americans. One study by the Kaiser Family Foundation found the community had the highest risk of hospitalization and death after testing positive for COVID-19. And they face a continuing increase of hate crimes triggered by the pandemic. Advocates for the Asian American community say they're worried a lack of health research funded by the National Institute of Health, focusing specifically on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, could be hiding the true physical and mental health impacts of these crises.
The patterns of support, specifically funding for research focused on AA NHPI communities, is woefully terrible. So less than a penny for every dollar that the NIH spends on health research goes to AA and HPI communities. And, we make up 6% of the population.
Dr. Yip is now looking into the biases faced by scientists trying to get funding for AAPI research projects.
One is this idea that Asians are a model minority. So the idea that Asians are hardworking, they're successful, that stereotype really sort of obscures the challenges that may be present for Asian communities. And another idea is that we're not doing as poorly as other groups of color.
The Charles B. Wang Community Health Center has been looking after people in Manhattan's Chinatown for 50 years. While it provides care for all, it tailors services to the specific health needs of Asian Americans. The CEO says little of the research that is done addresses the wide diversity within the community.
Asia represents like 60% of the entire Earth. So to paint Asian Americans with one brush and to collect information in that one bucket by itself is inadequate. So we are really excited about any effort that would seek to really break down the myriad health concerns and that affect Asian Americans.
Researchers say the best way to tackle a lack of health research targeting the AAPI community is to highlight the problem publicly and to engage with federal organizations that have the power to focus more resources on the issue. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
And the headlines again. The Taliban say 13 people, including women and children, have been killed and more than 50 injured by two separate explosions outside Kabul airport. Other estimates put the death toll as high as 50 people. The Pentagon has said at least one was a suicide attack. No group has yet claimed responsibility. While we've been on air, a Taliban spokesman has strongly condemned the attack.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.